Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. After taking a long dating break post-divorce, I decided to dip my toe into the waters of Tinder at the persistent urging of a few well-meaning friends. I ended up matching with a guy named Abraham who seemed perfectly nice and normal at first through our messaging exchanges. However, our arcade date took a disturbing and threatening turn, revealing Abraham's true aggressive tendencies lurking beneath the surface. Abraham's Tinder profile featured a variety of posed photos showing him outdoors skiing, hiking mountains, camping, and riding bicycles. His witty little bio highlighted that he was new to town for a demanding job and was trying to meet people and make connections in the area. Our initial conversations over Tinder messaging were lighthearted as we realized we shared an affinity for retro arcade games and bonding over childhood memories playing vintage favorites like Pac-Man and pinball. So when Abraham suggested meeting up for a fun date at a local bar arcade with tons of throwback games, I happily and unsuspectingly agreed. We met on a sunny Saturday afternoon at the neon arcade bar Abraham had picked out. I recognized him immediately as he walked in thanks to that memorable mountain summit photo from his Tinder profile. Abraham greeted me with a polite but slightly awkward hug before gallantly paying our entrance fee and leading the way inside like a true gentleman. For the first couple hours, we had a genuinely fun time competing against each other on games like Pac-Man, Skee-Ball, Galaga, and vintage pinball machines while keeping up engaged conversation about our pop culture favorites. However, I did notice, while very minor at first, Abraham seemed a bit shy and reserved, often letting me take the lead picking which games to play next or topics to chat about. But eventually he loosened up over the course of the date, and his confidence seemed to grow. He became much chattier and more charismatic, even bordering on an oversharing or rambling a bit when talking extensively about his high-stress new job. After we had exhausted most of the arcade offerings, Abraham enthusiastically suggested heading next door to grab an after-date drink together at the dive bar connected to the arcade. I was honestly really enjoying myself so far on the date and didn't see any looming red flags or harm in agreeing to just one drink with Abraham. However, this turned out to be a fateful lapse in judgment. Looking back, meeting at a bar rather than a more public coffee shop was probably not the ideal environment, even though bars weren't necessarily my typical scene or preference. We sat side by side on stools at the dingy bar and each ordered a beer. With the loud music pumping, we had to lean in close to maintain conversation. That's when Abraham began testing boundaries in overt ways that started to make me uncomfortable. At first, it was subtle physical contact like gently leaning against my shoulder, chatting in my ear, or making our knees touch. But he progressively pushed further, eventually putting his hand on my lower back and leaving it there. Each time he initiated unwanted contact, I subtly tried to shift myself away on the stool to signal my building unease. Abraham also started steering our small talk into much more invasive and inappropriate territory, asking probing questions about my past relationships, dating preferences, views on commitment and children, pressing for intimate details I preferred not to share so soon with a virtual stranger. Sensing the night was veering into dangerous territory, I gave only vague, polite responses to redirect the conversation. After less than an hour at the bar, the entire evening had taken on a tense, unsettling tone, and I announced I should get going and head home. I politely left cash on the bar to cover my single beer. However, Abraham very quickly chugged the last of his own drink and followed me out, insisting he wanted to walk me home since it was dark out. Given it was barely 8 p.m. and still partially light out, along with the fact we were downtown in a well-populated area, his persistence raised major alarm bells. I tried firmly declining his escort offer, emphasizing I lived very close by. But Abraham continued insisting in a pushy manner that he just wanted to accompany me the whole way and make sure I got home safely. His change in tone from polite to entitled and aggressive was very concerning. We walked in thick, uncomfortable silence for several blocks as they led us towards my apartment building just to end this disastrous evening quickly. As soon as the entrance was in sight half a block away, Abraham suddenly stopped and moved uncomfortably close to me, looming over me on the sidewalk. He then had the audacity to ask if he could come inside my apartment, since he still lived far away with roommates and didn't often have alone time or privacy. Before I could even process this alarming proposition from someone I just met hours ago, he grasped my wrist tightly as I tried backing away. Abraham begged in a pitiful tone for me to change my mind and let him come upstairs, applying more pressure to my arm. In that moment of sheer panic, I harshly told Abraham to get his hands off me immediately. The second he loosened his frightening grip, I took the opportunity to break free and sprinted at full speed towards my building entrance. I could hear him calling after me, his tone oscillating schizophrenically between harassing and pleading. My hands shook as I entered the lobby and jammed the elevator button while watching Abraham pace erratically on the sidewalk through the windows until he finally stormed off. My sense of wariness and hypervigilance only grew in the tense days following this traumatic encounter. I couldn't shake the ominous feeling of being watched on my daily commutes or followed without notice. Then early one weekday morning on my way to work, my worst fears were confirmed when I noticed Abraham's familiar face standing at the bus stop directly across the street from my apartment building. My stomach dropped and my heart started racing, prompting me to have a full-blown panic attack. I immediately called out sick from work, too shaken to function or focus. Soon after this sighting, I arrived home to find a package waiting on my doorstep addressed in unfamiliar sloppy handwriting to my nickname. Against my better judgment, I opened it to find souvenirs referencing the arcade date inside. A plush skee-ball prize clearly won that day and a bag of vintage 1980s arcade tokens from the bar. Now completely and utterly terrified by Abraham's stalking behavior escalating, I immediately filed a detailed report with the local police, providing a lengthy evidence trail of our Tinder conversations, his harassing texts when I stopped responding after the date, and ultimately the contents of the package he left. Thankfully, showing how he continued contacting me after I cut things off gave the authorities what they needed to swiftly pursue and grant a restraining order preventing him from approaching or interacting with me again. For many weeks after receiving closure from the police intervention, I still found myself anxiously scanning over my shoulder when walking alone or constantly worrying I was being watched or tracked by Abraham. But finally, confirming he was officially barred from contacting me allowed me to gradually stop feeling like a powerless victim. I learned the hard way to listen to my intuition in the future when subtle red flags appear early with new dates. I also realized that nobody owes their time, attention, or affection to someone just because initial effort was shown or money was spent on them. This traumatic first experience trying online dating taught me the critical importance of treading cautiously when meeting strangers in person, even if you believe you are totally vibing over messaging. I initially matched with a beautiful girl named Sophie, whose profile indicated she had recently relocated from Manchester, England to Paris in France for an elite modeling career. We really seemed to hit it off, messaging each other enthusiastically for weeks. However, things took a very sketchy and scammy turn when Sophie started heavily implying I should buy her a plane ticket so she could finally come visit me and we could meet up in person. Sophie's Tinder profile had instantly caught my eye thanks to the gorgeous high-quality modeling portfolio photos she had uploaded showcasing her exploring viral Parisian cafes and vineyards dressed in various flowy bohemian dresses. Her clever bio clearly stated she was originally from Manchester, England, but had recently made the big move to Paris after successfully signing with a prestigious international modeling agency. We matched online and Sophie soon messaged me first, initiating playful yet flirty banter and making me feel like she was sincerely interested. Over the first couple weeks, Sophie and I fell into a routine of chatting casually through the app every morning and night about common interests like art, wine, photography, and travel aspirations. She would frequently send me professionally shot modeling images from different recent campaigns she was supposedly working, asking for my opinions on which styled looks and makeup I preferred on her. Our conversations online felt natural, engaging, and flirtatious. I always eagerly looked forward to seeing Sophie's messages in my inbox, as they had become the consistent highlight of my day. After about 2 weeks of consistent chatting, I finally worked up the courage and confidence to ask Sophie if she would be interested in meeting up with me for drinks the next time she was back home visiting family and friends in Manchester. Much to my excitement and relief, she enthusiastically said she would absolutely love to finally meet me in person and that a date sounded amazing. However, Sophie then gently explained that due to her blossoming modeling career, her agency unfortunately had her completely booked up for shoots overseas for the next couple months at least, so meeting up very soon would be unlikely. but we agreed to keep planning for a future date when she eventually made it back to England after this upcoming busy travel period. In the meantime, Sophie and I only grew closer, speaking on the app for hours every day about deeper topics like our families, short and long-term life goals, religious views, embarrassing childhood stories, and detailed accounts of our past relationships. I felt an intense emotional intimacy developing beyond just surface-level flirting. Sophie really seemed like the most grounded, compassionate, beautiful dream woman I had been searching for my whole life. As things started feeling increasingly serious between us, I even suggested coming to visit her in France sometime soon since she claimed it was difficult getting away for trips back home. However, Sophie gently hesitated at this idea of me visiting her abroad, claiming her weekends there were often far too busy and drama-filled with glitzy fashion shows, networking events, and strict modeling shoots. The turning point came one night when Sophie initiated an unexpected video call with me out of the blue. Behind her posed on an elegant balcony overlooking a dazzling golden hour view of the Eiffel Tower. She confessed with a sad tone that despite living out her modeling ambitions, life in the big city had become painfully lonely. Sophie expressed earnestly that she often wished we could just be together in person already. When I empathetically asked what was stopping that from becoming a reality, Sophie implied she simply did not have the funds available to purchase flights back to the UK in between sporadic modeling jobs. Feeling helpless and wanting to cheer her up, I enthusiastically offered right then and there to take care of buying plane tickets myself so we could finally meet in person. Sophie initially declined my offer graciously and avoided giving me a direct answer, but I gently insisted and assured her I was more than happy to cover the flight costs completely. After thinking it over for a minute, Sophie finally and hesitantly sent me her ideal flight time preferences, along with some dates that could potentially work well with her chaotic schedule. Overjoyed at the thought of finally being able to meet this amazing woman I had grown so close with, I immediately purchased the exact round-trip tickets Sophie requested, right there on my credit card without any lingering doubts or hesitation. I felt completely sure she would reimburse me once we met, and she even mentioned she felt like the luckiest girl in the world to have met such a generous, caring man. However, in the week leading up to Sophie's scheduled arrival into Manchester, I noticed her messages became increasingly sporadic and short in length, which I naively chalked up to simply her incredibly busy and hectic international modeling schedule before a trip. On the actual day I was expecting Sophie to land based on the flight itineraries, she went totally radio silent and her Tinder profile disappeared before my eyes. Very confused, panicked, and concerned, I urgently contacted the airline directly to check on the ticket status, only to discover the ticket I had purchased had never been claimed or used whatsoever. I frantically messaged Sophie on every communication channel we had asking where she was and what was going on, but only received vague excuses and stories about a sudden family emergency back home and missing her flight at the last minute. She insisted she felt awful and promised adamantly to make it up to me, but something in my gut told me things were very off about this entire situation. Suspicions growing, I decided to investigate and reverse image search the modeling photos on Sophie's profile, only to discover not a single one actually belonged to her. The gorgeous images were all random stock photos easily found online. Calling the phone number she had provided next revealed it was completely disconnected. It suddenly became painfully clear that this whole time I had been getting catfished and manipulated by a complete stranger. Sophie had completely fabricated our entire whirlwind romance and deep emotional connection just to trick and pressure me into buying her a free luxury plane ticket that she clearly never actually planned to use to visit me in reality. I felt like such a fool for falling for this obvious scam and allowing my judgment to be clouded. When I frantically called the airline and credit card company to plead my situation, they regretfully informed me that since the ticket itself was indeed purchased legitimately, the fact it went unused was irrelevant in terms of getting my substantial money back. I was now at nearly $1,000 with essentially no way to recover it. Reporting the Tinder profile for fraudulent activity yielded unsatisfying results as well. Tinder informed me that without concrete details like Sophie's real name or contact information, the platform had no way to definitively verify any wrongdoing had taken place, and therefore could not yet remove her account. I remained helplessly aware that her faked profile was likely still active and continuing to scam countless other lonely men using the same exact fantasy relationship tactics. After a devastating recent breakup, my well-meaning friends finally convinced me to give online dating a try for the first time via Tinder. I was admittedly skeptical at first, but eventually made a profile with some cute, flattering photos of myself, along with a clever little bio paragraph, all at their persistent urging. To my surprise, I quickly seemed to hit it off conversationally with a guy named Matt over the app, and we soon made plans to actually meet up in person for drinks that upcoming weekend. At first, Matt seemed totally normal and harmless based on our friendly messaging exchanges, but it quickly became disturbingly clear once we met face to face that this was an incredibly unsafe situation I had put myself in. Matt's Tinder profile featured lots of recent pictures showing him hiking outdoors, hanging with friends at bars, and doing various activities. His witty bio highlighted his love of the outdoors, craft beers, and indie music. Our initial conversations over the app flowed very easily back and forth, with Matt coming across as super laid-back, outgoing, open, and funny. When he politely asked if I wanted to join him for a casual drink downtown sometime, I suggested meeting at a popular, crowded brewery near me on a Friday night. Matt enthusiastically agreed that sounded perfect, and we set the plans in motion. The evening our planned meetup arrived, and I made sure to get to the bustling brewery early to try and secure a table. Every time the front door opened, I found myself glancing up, hoping to spot Matt walking in based on the photos I recognized from his Tinder profile. Finally, a guy entered who looked just like one of Matt's main pictures and caught my eye. I waved discreetly to confirm it was in fact him, and he made his way over to join me at the table I had snagged. Matt looked pretty much identical to his pictures in real life and gave me a warm, seemingly genuine hug before sitting down across from me. We hit it off right away and fell into easy conversation over a couple of beers. But when there was a natural lull in the dialogue, I noticed Matt started acting kind of distracted and antsy, constantly scoping out the crowded room rather than making eye contact with me. I wrote off his odd behavior as just normal first date jitters and tried to keep the give and take conversation flowing naturally. After we each had a few drinks, Matt enthusiastically asked if I felt like checking out the trendy cocktail bar next door that he said made amazing Moscow mules. I was honestly having a pretty fun time so far and agreed that could be fun. In hindsight, this is when things really started to take a disturbing turn. I got up to quickly use the restroom before heading to the next location, and when I returned, I found that Matt had already taken the liberty of moving down to 2 bar stools much closer to where I had been sitting before. It struck me as territorial and a major red flag. As the night wore on, Matt proceeded to inch his bar stool closer and closer so that we were uncomfortably pressed shoulder to shoulder. He also kept initiating increasingly invasive physical contact, a hand lightly placed on my shoulder, playing with my hair, grazing his hand against my thigh. All the while, the personal conversation topics he pressed me on took a much darker turn as well, with Matt prying about old relationships, family drama, and even asking my views on having kids someday. I gave only vague, polite answers in response and kept subtly trying to shift my body away whenever he encroached on my space. I started desperately looking for any feasible excuse to politely end this traumatic date early and head home safely alone. I finally pretended to suddenly get a concerned text from my roommate claiming my cat was extremely ill and vomiting, and that I was needed back immediately to help. Ever the hero, Matt immediately offered to accompany me all the way back to my apartment to check on my pet and make sure I was okay. This alarming gesture obviously raised major red flags, and I insisted repeatedly that I was totally fine getting home by myself. I grabbed my purse and coat and headed briskly for the exit with Matt following unsettlingly close behind as I made a beeline for the street. My intention was to hail a cab immediately and make a solo getaway, but suddenly I felt Matt's hand aggressively grab hold of mine, pulling me back forcefully towards him. He protested that we should share another Uber ride together, but I harshly yanked my hand away from his grasp and frantically jumped into the back of the very first taxi I could flag down. My heart was absolutely pounding as Matt stood frozen on the sidewalk, just coldly staring at me, making no effort to get into the cab. I shrieked at the driver to please just go. It was only once I was safely back in my apartment that I saw the parade of unread, angry, and apologetic messages from Matt blowing up my phone. The stream of unhinged texts ranged from raging at me for leaving him stranded at the bar without a proper goodbye, to desperately backpedaling and begging for another chance to take me on a more romantic date. But by far the most disturbing message of all was when he somehow knew precisely which intersection I had instructed the cab driver to originally drop me off at before having him reroute to my actual apartment building. I realized with horror that Matt must have followed closely behind in his own vehicle after I ditched him to flee alone in the taxi. I immediately blocked his number, but still could not calm my shaken nerves. The stalking and harassment escalated one evening when I arrived home from work to find a gift bag sitting on my doorstep addressed to me in an unfamiliar scrawl. Against my better judgment, I opened it to find a series of items inside that were clearly references to our one disastrous date. My favorite chocolates from a specialty brand we had discussed, a novel by an indie author he had recommended, a mixed CD containing songs from all the obscure bands he had raved about. Now having concrete proof that Matt had continued invading my privacy, I genuinely feared for my safety and what else this unhinged admirer was capable of. I immediately filed a police report with all the tangible evidence and took steps to tighten security at my apartment complex. Within just a couple days, the police informed me they had positively identified Matt through surveillance footage in my building and apprehended him for felony harassment and stalking charges, thanks in large part to his extensive criminal record of prior restraining orders and disputes with other women. I learned the sickening truth that I was far from the first date Matt had obsessed over and terrorized when things went south. It was a harrowing wake-up call about the importance of properly vetting strangers online before ever agreeing to meet in real life. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.